We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data, technology, and advanced analytics and intelligence.
That end up in some of our financial institutions as well as around the world and other areas. We've got a great session today with 4 panelists who are well versed in each of their areas of expertise. I would also open it up to the audience as we move through this. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. It's always better when it's an interactive session and folks in the audience get their questions answered as much as possible. If you feel like I'm not answering your question in the moment, please note I will probably also be trying to categorize them to some degree and make sure that we collect as much of the information as possible before giving it over to our panelists. So this afternoon, I'm going to start with ERIN, who's going to give us an introduction of who she is, how she got to this place, and what maybe your interest in mitigating these types of risks are.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. So hi, everybody. My name is ERIN. So I'm a senior product manager and intelligence analyst at a company called Constella. So we deal primarily with digital risk protection and using the information on the internet to help protect people. And one of the aspects of that, and the main area that I work in, is investigating bad actors, and that's really where I've kind of interfaced with the human trafficking area, is kind of trying to identify those individuals that are behind the activity and what information we can find about them on the web. So my background is, as kind of my job title suggests, is as an analyst. So I've been doing this for about 10 years, kind of doing attribution and investigations, and hopefully I can bring some of that information to the panel today. Thank you.
And Noel.
Hey all, I'm Noel Thomas, the CEO and founder of Zero Trafficking. My background was a statewide anti-trafficking coordinator in Florida, setting up safe houses and managing appropriations. I got to this issue playing in a rock and roll band that traveled internationally, and got a flyer on it, went to India, and then built a team of intelligence agency experts and data scientists, and we're hunting the organized crime portion of human trafficking with data and analytics.
And Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Glad you could join us today. I'm Sherrie CALTAGIRONE. I'm the founder and executive director at Global Emancipation Network. And at GEN, as we call ourselves, our mission is to end trafficking in all of its forms all over the world, specifically using data and technology approaches. So I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more during the panel about how we do that, some of the ways we do, some products and data that we offer. But really excited for this panel. Thanks for having me.
Certainly last but not least, Damian.
Hello, everyone. Damian TRAN, co-founder and chief technology officer over at Minerva AI. My background was actually in research, so I spent a number of years in academia working on deep learning technologies in the cancer research space. So back then, essentially, it was investigative tools, trying to leverage big data, unstructured text, clinical data, putting all that together and allowing us to find more effective pharmaceuticals against leukemia. And so, when I met my co-founders and we founded Minerva AI, I kind of took all that over into the financial crime space. And so we've had a number of opportunities to work with ATII recently and over the past couple of years, kind of in the human trafficking fighting space. And so at Minerva AI, we're working on automated enhanced due diligence technologies. So being able to kind of automate that whole value chain between adverse media, risk, watch list screening, and social media. And so it's great to be here and pretty excited to talk about where we can put these technologies forward.
Good, thank you. So for the benefit of anybody in the audience that maybe this is a new subject for them, and increasingly I have found in my work in banking that a lot of folks in the U.S. don't understand that this is not a problem that we import. This happens to the young women in our own country. I believe the Jeffrey Epstein trial has certainly brought some of that to light. I know I've had a lot more queries just from people that I know who know that I'm involved in this around, what can they do to help and what does it look like and those types of things. So I think if each of you could think about what would be most beneficial from your perspective for our audience of, what's your overarching view of maybe how the pandemic has changed the landscape of human trafficking, some of the things that have remained the same. I know in the work that we do, it's hard to move humans, so a lot of the same routes are still built in. But also, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, the DEA would find, truckloads of cash that no one had been able to launder yet. So there are little nuances there that may be interesting. And if we could start there, and then we'll move into some more deeper dive on each person's expertise. So Noel, I'll start out with you.
Yes, absolutely. So as part of the data and analytics that we were tracking on organized crime, they were still very active during the pandemic, violating a lot of the stay-at-home orders in the onset of the pandemic. And I love, Rachel, that you pointed out the idea of the drug trafficking routes. We argue that, organized crime, the larger the organization, the more they have to use the tried and true routes for drug trafficking, stash houses, and elsewhere. And so we saw that trend continue, that they were using the same logistics, the same advertising methods, the same online forums. And I think that there was actually an uptick of online exploitation with a crossover to trafficking during the pandemic, since so many people were at home. And so unfortunately, whether it's pandemics or wars, it creates a ripe opportunity for human trafficking to occur and grow.
I appreciate you actually bringing up the war currently, because that certainly is something that we should consider as we move forward. So Sherry, what are you seeing?
I agree with what Noel was saying, actually, and I think that we've seen a bit of a shift, as he mentioned, from the very beginning of the pandemic, when we were actually able to use those lockdown orders or those stay-in-place orders to help identify bad actors. So we could use signals intelligence, for example, to see where things were being violated, and that was a helpful enforcement mechanism in it. But now, as the world is sort of going back to normal, we're just seeing more of the same thing. In the end, trafficking is a black market, isn't it? It's where supply and demand meet. And in order to have that, you have to have that brokering step in some way. It's really just still a supply chain where, unfortunately, this is men, women, and children that we're talking about. And in some ways, vulnerability increased during the pandemic, right? That people weren't able to receive access to some of the care or some of those touch points where victimization could be recognized by some of the external world, or it was more difficult for services to be provided. In some ways, we saw that the funding was being shifted away, and understandably to some extent, away from some human trafficking efforts to fight coronavirus and just the pandemic response. And we're still seeing that trickle-down effect, I think. So there's lots of different ways that we've seen it change, but as always, this is sort of an inelastic market in a way, and that it's here to stay, unfortunately, until we get better at fighting it. So we are right back to where we began.
Fair enough. And Damian.
Yeah, great points. And really from my perspective at Minerva AI, we've really been interested in trying to follow the money and where that trail goes, because really the money is the lifeblood of organized crime involvement in human trafficking, these larger, sophisticated human trafficking rings. So what we've kind of seen is, especially an uptick in blockchain-related technologies, cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency's been used to move increasing volumes, especially over the pandemic. Not only has there been an increase in, retail investment in crypto, but that's kind of spurned a whole bunch of infrastructure that's kind of expedited the process of moving money and then converting crypto into traditional currencies. And really that's the end goal, right? It's that kind of the laundering of that money to put it back into the economy where they can affect it. And so we've been kind of interested in trying to figure out, well, how can we tie together the anonymous blockchain wallet hash with the warm body behind that wallet? So, at the end of the day, there's somebody there that's actually having to transact and, convert between that cryptocurrency to the traditional currency. And so, there's been, especially, relating to the infrastructure side of things, the crypto custodians. So, the Coinbases, the Binances of the world. I think that the regulation focus has been kind of on a border security approach, where it's we can look at the border of these custodians' purviews. We can kind of look at where the money is turning over between traditional and crypto, and but yeah, it's kind of outside of that realm. The the MetaMask anonymous wallets, that's kind of been where it's been tricky to trace down that money, because it just kind of goes off of the edge there.
So I'm actually going to go a little bit out of order based on what we talked about. And Damian, I want to pull that thread a little bit more around what you're talking about with the infrastructure around blockchain. And maybe if you can talk about how the technology is facilitating the identification of those behaviors, and how the audience maybe, I understand without, hiring a Chainalysis or a firm like yours, understanding the know your wallet piece could be harder to uncover. But what are you seeing on how open source can maybe help with that, or other platforms that you may know about that our audience doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. And you referenced Chainalysis, CipherTrace is another technology that we've had the opportunity to discuss with, and they're working on some really great stuff and trying to it's because when you're looking at risk in the blockchain and you're kind of moving through all of the different blocks and hashes, it really comes down to trying to tie together more peripheral risk, because you don't always have access to that data. Like, this is the John Smith that owns this wallet, right? The infrastructure side, so on the light side, if you come on the other side of the border where everybody is authenticated, and say you sign up for a custodian and say, I want to start trading in crypto, then at that point, it's there's all the regulation around KYC, watch list screening, having to know the identity of the person that holds that wallet and is on the platform. But when you kind of go into the dark side of that, on the other side of the border, and you're kind of transacting in dark space with just pure MetaMask wallets and non-identified wallets, it's that's kind of where it becomes pretty important to use some of these like CipherTrace tools, where you're trying to figure out, well, if we can flag a watch list of known risky wallets, then if you have the hash of a wallet that's trying to transact here, you can trace that, right? And you can find out how far away is this wallet from a wallet that we know is linked to, say, North Korea, or a sanctioned entity or country. So that's kind of at least where we've been very interested in working, with partners like that, to try to like tie together, because it's a whole chain, right? Going from the wallet back down to the person. And so at Minerva AI, that's the part that we deal with, is if you can get that that John Smith, really any tidbit of information about the person behind the wallet, then you can screen that and pull in all that open source information across the web, both like the surface web and the deep web. There's definitely a lot of information on both sides.
Yeah, and not to get too deep for the audience, I think one of the things that's interesting there is that, with graph theory, you accrete risk. So I can be related to you and not necessarily be a bad actor. So really separating that out seems like it could be an important piece, which, Erin, that actually brings me over to you from, I'm a big believer in there's the intersection of human intelligence and machine intelligence. And one of my dear friends in law enforcement, regularly reminds me that technology cannot solve, can't give me a gut feel, so to speak. Since you've listened to kind of the tech side, I know clearly you use technical tools at work, but where do you find that intersection of where you just have a really good gut feel about something based on just your body of knowledge, and you kind of pull that thread?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of as an analyst, I often think that you need humans involved, because otherwise I wouldn't have a job. So I think it's really important that humans can utilize and analyze the data that's out there. So there are humans behind all of this information and all of the interactions that are happening, and having someone who's there who can kind of spot the patterns and kind of see how things are flowing is really beneficial. And then also, I think just in terms of, I always think, with technology and security, it's usually the people that are the weak link within that. So, you can set up IT and you can set up all of this security, but if someone gets spearphished and they click on a link, then, it's all for nothing. And I think, the same is said for those bad actors. They are going to make mistakes and they are going to do things that's going to allow us to be able to track them, see the patterns that they're using. Like you guys were saying earlier, those tried and trusted routes that people are using, they're going to go back to those and use them repeatedly. And then also, criminals are falling for the same things that you and I are. So, Damien was talking about cryptocurrency wallets and being able to associate those with individuals. We see quite a lot of cryptocurrency addresses that are being released in breaches. So they're being connected to email addresses and full names and things like that, because I think we often think with breaches and things like that it's, the big companies like Target and Experian that have to announce it and it's in the news. But actually, a lot of these lower level forums are being hacked as well. And a lot of the places where these actors are operating. So, a lot of sites that are used for child exploitation material or are used for trafficking are also being targeted by other hackers. And that's one of the ways that we've worked with ATII in recent years. Is kind of running the names and the information that they're able to find across our data sets and seeing where we can kind of build that picture and start to expand on those individuals. And I think going back to your original question, that's kind of, again, where you need that human interaction to pull at that thread and to kind of verify some of the data that you're seeing, because sometimes, not all of the connections that you see there are going to be true connections. You need to kind of analyze them in some way.
Sure. So that actually that's a great segue to one of the questions we have, which is, and this is an old question now in some ways, but the transparency that, crypto and blockchain advertise, especially around more of a DeFi network. What's the opinion of maybe Noel or Sherrie around, if it's open, how is it so much less of a threat, and how are they hiding behind some of that when it comes to the anti-money laundering pieces?
Noel, I'll give you first crack at that one.
Yeah, a lot, with chain analysis, breaking up some of these dark web networks and the IRS criminal investigations really going after the proceeds of these organized crime groups that use exchanges and uses crypto. And so I think that there's a lot of tools that are coming out on the market between TRM Labs and CipherTrace and the work that Hades is doing with ATII, that each of these pieces kind of bring a new look into what criminals thought were previously obfuscated and gives an opportunity for wallet tracing, trend analysis, and ultimately seizure of those crypto assets.
That is also one of our other questions. If anyone, and I don't know the answer, so I don't want to misspeak in any ways, but is anyone on our panel aware if folks have used the Hades platform for their investigations and what maybe the success has been? So Erin, you're nodding. So
yeah, so we have
you.
Yeah, we have used it. We have access to it. So, I have access to it. And routinely when we get, selectives or attributes, monikers, whatever you want to call them, I never know what the standard is these days. We will run those across Hades and see where we can get results and activity. And, looking at the crypto wallets or looking at the onion sites that are being frequently used can be really valuable in kind of expanding the investigation. So that's definitely something that we do. And it's something that we're working with ATII to make available to our customers through our investigative OSINT platform as well.
Great, thank you. So I think maybe I'll go a little bit deeper on some of the data pieces. And, in the last 10 years or so, we've all had access to a lot more data. We have a huge access to, the increase in compute power, which enables us to really crunch through a lot more data. And it's a lot less expensive. I mean, I think about the number of startups or scale-ups that are really involved in coalescing data. I know Nomino Data Labs works really closely with ATII, and I've worked with them in some of the work that I do in the FIUs for our banks. Where have you guys seen the most success there in identifying bad actors, or has it, how much fluency has it provided to, and maybe also enabling the people around you to be better partners? Noel, you said sounds like you do a lot of work, not just with technology, but also human intelligence. So has it enabled you to really put somebody on a path and say, hey, go track this person down for me? So I'm fine, whoever wants to go first with that.
Sherrie, you want to jump in there first?
Sure. I think you're absolutely right, Rachel, in that the the costs of storage and compute have gone down, which has made things easier for everyone. And just the willingness for, the thousands of siloed actors out there to begin using cloud-based technology, which enables machinable data, or for us to all actually begin using it. However, I would also say that siloed data is still a massive problem in this space. I see everyone nodding here too. Absolutely, everyone has their little island, and unfortunately, since this is a problem that crosses jurisdictional boundaries, we can't operate on our own islands, can we? We actually have to work together, and that enables us, or it requires us, to treat this as a data problem requiring a database solution. So, for instance, in one project that we were working on, we had to pull thousands of business licenses and complaints on those businesses, right? And these were in the Excel spreadsheets, and these were in PDFs that were, completely not readable by a machine, so that we could put it into a platform, name your favorite platform to be able to use it. We had to go through dozens of hours in order to do that, right? And I think that sort of gets back to your other point about where does the human come into it. We're still there. Where the edge of technology is, including on how we can use data, that's where the human comes into point. And, I'll tell you a story about another, time where we sort of were augmenting technology with human involvement in data as well. One of the tools that we've been creating with camera forensics in the UK is a way to identify clothing-based cues in child abuse imagery, so that we can then try to identify the child, right? And we had one officer who was using it who had been previously working this case for a number of weeks before they had access to this tool and this platform. And it required, dozens of hours of Googling. Everyone's favorite platform is Google, right? And it just is not super efficient when you're talking about, say, like thousands of businesses with a particular logo, or, tens of thousands of schools in a country, whatever your clothing-based clue may be, right? But using this tool, they were able to bring it down to a number of potential targets, and they all had the same sort of clothing clue in it. But then, and this is where, again, like that human input comes in, and where you need to bring data from lots of different sources actually into it, was able to see one grocery chain just barely visible in the background of this image, right? And it became that they were able to just look up a list of where are these grocery stores located, and then bring it together, pair the two together, and that's where the magic happens. So it's lots of different data sources that has to come across on the cheap storage and compute and across platforms that really enables the magic, I think, to help identify bad actors. So that was a really long and sprawling story, but those are my thoughts on it.
Thank you. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a theme that's being touched on here, is the importance of analyst plus machine working together. And that is so key to weed out a lot of the false positives that occur in these data sets, and the opportunities to miss threads or make those connections. And so I think it's really encouraging to see so many teams that are working with that mindset, that it requires not only the technical expertise of the analyst working with the data, but a partnership between data companies and those that are providing data, because there's different data sets that everyone has in kind of a unique piece of the puzzle. I think that's the key: collaboration to the future of counter-trafficking efforts, especially when it comes to this data piece, is breaking down those silos and providing more robust full data sets to the market.
And so, Damian, I'm actually going to turn to you and totally put you on the spot. I think you're going to absolutely be able to answer this. I was thinking while Noel and Sherrie were talking, and Erin, I'd be interested to see what you think about this in a moment. One of the places where there's a lot of work being done that I think is really cool is the virtual machine. So where you overlay all the machine learning onto a process, and it starts to percolate up, different anomalies or things that aren't maybe right. So based on what you know from your research and some of the AI and machine learning, do you feel like this is a place where that type of technology could be overlaid on a thread or on a process? Everyone is pretty much in agreement that a lot of the routes that we're using are somewhat the same. So there should be anomalies that pop up that are different. To really hone in on some of what Sherrie is talking about of, hey, how can I learn these different things and then reduce time again? Because obviously when humans human beings' lives are in danger, time is really of the essence. So that's kind of a big, long-winded question, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. And then Erin, I want to see kind of what you're thinking from the investigative side or analyst side.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to answer that. Sherry, I definitely resonate with that story. It's definitely it's one that we've heard like quite a few times with pouring of all this data. There's so much data out there, and how do you actually figure out a way to extract that? And Noel's sentiments about data siloing, and Sherry had touched on that same topic too. It's something that, especially on the machine learning side, it's been something that we've really been trying to investigate. Is how can we unlock new avenues into data extraction on the open web? And open web being above ground and deep web, both of these sources have an immense amount of unstructured information, and so that's kind of where the machine learning that we've been working on and the stuff that I've been working on in my research is really applied. It's using tools like named entity recognition, where you can apply deep learning models to try to extract the connections between individuals, entities, dates of birth, occupations, all this really rich information from it, and it's all there, right, in the articles. Like if you were to search, an individual or an organization in Google, you're going to find a lot of unstructured articles. And so a lot of the manual work that goes into pouring through all of this is saying, okay, well, now I have to sit down, I have to read this article and try to figure out where the key information is. And so if you have to do that for thousands and thousands of individuals, especially with some of these really complex organized crime investigations, it can just be incredibly sprawling. And so for us, we've been able to automate a lot of that using named entity recognition, as well as risk classification. So the named entity recognition is the part where you're pulling out all of those names and the identifying attributes of those names from the articles. Like a lot of news articles will say, John Smith, 52, did this in this state. And so if you can pull out enough of that, you can start building a bit of a knowledge graph. So here's this actor who maybe initially you did not think was really a key player in this ring, and then we find some obscure article from 10 years ago that said that they did this, right? And then so now that kind of becomes a more important avenue of investigation. So it's really been about trying to build larger knowledge graphs using these types of automation, and then of course layering on top of the extraction that kind of more advanced layer of bottling up kind of a bit of the human intuition around risk classification. So when a person reads an article and knows this is related to human trafficking, this is related to narcotics trafficking, and being able to say, okay, so now that we've created this gigantic knowledge graph, let's go and classify the risk associated with all these actors on the graph, and then we can use graph-based analysis to say, okay, we're seeing these individuals are related together and they're co-mentioned in these articles, and there's a high confidence of human trafficking risk in those articles. So, here's a little bit of a cluster that we might want to take a little bit more of a look at and see how they relate. So it's kind of been about layering several different types of machine learning. For us, it's all been deep learning, but there's several different types of machine learning as well that can be useful in different circumstances. But we've had quite a bit of success with that kind of method, and especially with cloud compute. Cheaper cloud compute, you can really deploy much larger models than you ever could and extract more granular data and more accurate risk classification. So it's been something that I've been really excited to track over my research career, and kind of going forward as well, just a number of new technologies that are being built to really help investigators in this space.
So Erin, how have you maybe tell a couple of stories around how you've benefited from some of the expediency of information sometimes, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think to Damian's point, and going back to what I said earlier, like I do think you need humans, but also you can't possibly go through all of the data and all of the information that is out there. And as Sherrie said, it's very siloed. So you might have one piece of the puzzle, but someone else has the other piece, and there's no kind of real way to put it together. So you certainly do need that technology. And I think, as Damian mentions about link analysis is so important in investigations, of being able to kind of put those pieces together, and it does take time, and it is difficult to do. And I think one of the maybe more negative things, and I'm probably on that side of the technology, is that there now are just so many options out there in terms of what people can do. So there's like 5 or 6 companies that are focused on one area, and that's probably a very modest assumption of how many there are. within the kind of, trafficking, threat intelligence, cyber intelligence realm. And it can be really difficult to identify which tools are going to work best for you and which ones are utilizing the data. Because at the end of the day, especially if this data is open source, even dark web data that's still open source, everyone can get access to it, but it's how you analyze it and how you put those pieces together and kind of pull that together. And one of the ways that we focused on it at my organization is we very much look at breach data, as I mentioned earlier. So where information is being leaked out there, and we've been able to use that successfully to identify individuals. So we can take their kind of alias, their handle, and through kind of information that's been leaked about them and mistakes that they've made, we're able to get to their true identity. But obviously you can't always do that. It isn't always that easy. I like to, whenever I'm watching television with my boyfriend, I'm always like, you can't investigate things that quick. You don't get people's financials in like 5 seconds. Like, that's not real. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of technology. So, that's the golden nugget of being able to identify individuals, but you can also just identify more information about them. One of the cases I looked at a while ago when I was looking at some data related to individuals that I think had been found on the back pages, was that reuse of passwords was a way that we were able to kind of monitor their activity, but also the passwords that they were using. So unfortunately, they were using passwords that kind of insinuated the activity that they were involved in and were related to children and things like that. But it allowed you to kind of follow them and see where those activities were, and then also see that they were on sites that were targeted at children, like things like Neopets and stuff like that. So you can kind of take those and start to look at them. And then also we have a lot of breaches that are adult in nature. So some of them that's fine if we want to do that, but some of that leads to kind of other activities. So we can kind of look at the people that are on those sites and the information that they're providing and kind of run that against things like Hades and see if kind of we're seeing any transition. So I think it's not just having that data, it's being able to analyze that data and use technology and the link analysis Damien says, and kind of models of what you're seeing. And I think that really just kind of enables analysts to do their job in a more accurate and faster way.
Sure. So that's actually a great segue to kind of our last question. So I work in, the banking side of the house, and their sharing information is really hard because we've not modernized some of our laws on the books. And that's not a political opinion at all. It's just a matter of fact. And it takes a long time for banks to process some of their information requests. I think there has been a large shift culturally around how are we actually protecting vulnerable populations, with the increase of ESG, both in corporate America and just corporations around the world. Banks now have an increased interest in, are they, lending to responsible parties? They understand what those people are doing. And the consumer is also demanding that as well. So they're kind of getting that pressure on both levels. Now, candidly, my position in America is that we will not actually indoctrinate it from a regulatory standpoint. It'll be grassroots. A regulator come in and say, hey, well, you said you're monitoring this risk. Now show me where you're doing it. I do think the EU is a little bit ahead of us on that one. What's interesting to me always in these panels is, we're all collaborating. We're all on the same page. We probably get there in a different way, but we very much want to get to the same point, and we don't have a lot of things restricting us. So Noel, what are you seeing around like that type of cultural shift? And, do you hit roadblocks, and how do you get around those? And, just for our audience, how, maybe some of the tips and tricks that you use. And I'm going to go around to all of you, and I'm just curious to hear what you're seeing, how you're, and how you're moving around it. You're on mute, Noel, or you froze maybe. Oh, maybe he froze. So Damien, I'm gonna, there you go. There you are. Now I've got 2 of you. Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Knows that I missed it all. No, I'll take a pass on this one.
Yeah, so I think that one of the interesting emerging battles out of kind of the push toward ESG and kind of additional regulation and transparency into data and data sharing is the concept of open banking. As you mentioned, the EU has really made strides toward this much farther than we have in North America. But it's not to say there haven't been discussions kind of moving into that direction, even in terms of some kind of limited data sharing regulations in banking. That kind of it's actually been something that we've been leveraging. That there are certain attributes of information that you are able to share. They're very, very high level. Like you can't, share something so specific as, we filed a SAR or STR against a specific individual, but there's certain additional attributes of risk, that like certain investigator notes that can be shared. And so we've been kind of trying to leverage network effects of that between institutions where, an investigation that was previously done in this place and they found this risk. And so if they can keep it very, very high level, then sometimes that risk is enough to be able to flag that same actor somewhere else. So, a lot of times if you're trying to evade the system and the regulations and, the KYC, you might try to just hop between banks to try to get your money through into the system. And so I think that these kind of strides where we can open up even very narrow windows of data sharing between institutions can really, really help, because now this person trying to get their money in through one bank was refused. And so then they go to the next one, right? Then a flag from that investigator who spent all this time can immediately get transferred over. And so it's a very fast kind of refusal, or, a kind of a closer look at this new person walking through their door.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're saying some of my favorite words, and I want to, I think, flip back to what you said in your last answer, Damian, actually, and you used my two favorite words, risk classification. And this works, or this is important for both us as consumers and us as stakeholders in the fight against human trafficking, as well as those sitting on the other side of the table from the corporate perspective as well. So for them, they obviously are very interested in not, or the majority of them are very interested in not hosting or somehow being complicit in trafficking related activities, right? For both civil and criminal reasons, they recognize a liability here. So we're seeing an increase really in risk classification tools, either developed in-house or brought in from some of the counter-trafficking stakeholders around here. However, to your point, I think, Rachel, there is absolutely a legislative brew storm coming. This is like top of mind for everyone. It's something that's happening here in the U.S. between the ERIN Act or some of the pressure that we're seeing around CDA 230. And it's certainly also happening over in the EU. And I think I agree with you, Rachel, that they're a little bit more advanced there between the e-privacy act or directive, and then some of the moves that are happening with GDPR and OSCE's report that just came out. If everyone hasn't seen that, definitely suggest reading that in this intersection of tech and trafficking. So we're seeing that again from that perspective. But then for those of us who are trying to identify bad actors or trying to use technology as well, we're also looking at risk classifiers. We're trying to understand from the outside and bring little pockets of data from here and there, create a smart model to help people triage their workflow. We've talked about that there's way too much data, there's too much trafficking to that's already happening, that we only have capacity to look at like the top 10 bad things that are happening today, or this month really. So, these are the things that we're looking at from like an ESG and corporate responsibility. The more that they do their job, and obviously self-policing, self-regulation isn't working, the easier it's making our job on the other side to find those bad actors that still get through. So this is my favorite soapbox, Rachel. Thanks for asking this question. I think all of us could probably wax on this one for quite a while. So I'll pass it to the next person.
Yeah, so I probably come at it from a different angle because I'm not as involved in the regulation and sides of it, but definitely, sharing data is so important, and it's something that just does not happen enough. And we've already said we're way too siloed, and a lot of, the reasons for that are because of regulations that are involved and privacy. And I think there's this constant balance that we have to have in all of these investigations and the things that we're doing between people's privacy and, you know, on the large people who are living good lives, doing good things, and then trying to find those bad people. And you do have to have a balance. And I think sometimes we go too far in the other direction. And as someone who is previously from the EU, I'm very aware of kind of like the the GDPR issues and the data protection issues that come up, and we basically don't have a customer meeting or an investigation or anything where someone doesn't ask about how we do that and how we protect that, and is it okay that people are viewing the data that we're providing to them. And you know, there are specific things within GDPR and other data protection provisions that do allow you to do investigations and do allow you to do those things, but there's so much confusion about those laws and how they impact them, and then about the fines that you will get if you break those laws, that I think people are terrified. So while it's trying to protect people, it is having an adverse effect on the data sharing. But that being said, you know, I am aware of organizations, particularly in the UK, where they're trying to get, you know, banks together, they're trying to get financial services together, and if they can't, you know, share things directly, they can at least talk about the same thing, so they can put the ideas in their head that, you know, maybe they should be looking at this. And then, you know, also in the UK, the regulation is very much on financial institutions that they have to identify and report human trafficking. And they're doing a lot of things in terms of putting leaflets and information out there for their customers to be able to identify it. And they are doing knowledge sharing around that. You know, banks are talking about, well, this worked for us, is this going to work for you? So I think those barriers are definitely coming down, but there's a long way to go. And I think regulation both you know, hampers and heeds what works and what doesn't.
So I'll make a comparison to the hospitality industry, and where there was several litigation suits that were brought against big chains for either knowingly or unknowingly facilitating human trafficking. And so in addition to the regulation that's coming down, I think that we're going to see more civil suits against corporations where they were either complicit or didn't have the proper training and data and protocols in place to defeat it. And so, Sherry, I think you called out the liability. These companies have a lot of liability on them, and FOSTA SESTA, you know, with the content platforms, has really made it so that, you know, any victim can sue the content that, or the platform that facilitated their trafficking. And so these sort of pushes, both in the hospitality industry and with social media companies, I think is coming to the financial sector. And we'll start to see more regulation, more guidance come down from FinCEN here in the US and globally regarding this anti-money laundering. And I think this ESG, you know, CSR angle of this is really going to open up for the counter-trafficking groups.
For the pandemic, I started seeing signs in my hotel room, like, you know, articulating all the signs that you see, you know, in the airport today. You know, now they've moved those into the hotel rooms. It's not just, you know, on the back of the ladies' bathroom in the train station or the bus station or the airport. So I think it's interesting that we'll see pressures come from a variety of corners to really help our financial institutions get a little bit better interest in mitigating that risk. And I also think too, sometimes it gets forgotten that money laundering is a predicate crime. So, you know, it's the bad actors they've already done their bad deed and they've already had their nefarious behavior. So it's how can we kind of keep them out of our bank if possible, as opposed to letting them in and then letting them use your rails. So probably just less than 2 minutes. One thing you want someone to take away from this when we're done here. So I will go ahead, Damian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that a big thing for me was just kind of the data sharing aspects of the discussion. I think that's so important, and really about using technology to unlock new ways to either share that data or to extract that data in roundabout ways. Because it's been interesting how sometimes you have certain data sources, you know, business registries or things like that, that you have to be a lawyer or you have to be a director living in that jurisdiction to get access to it, especially in Canada. It's been an issue being able to get access to that data. So sometimes you can still get the same quality of information or similar quality, at least enough to get the risk analysis by going around and getting the open source stuff. So there's a lot of information out there that exists out there in the web, and it's really just about being able to harness it using some of the really powerful technologies, especially machine learning, that exists out there today.
Erin, over to you.
Yeah, I think I'd just echo what Damian said. I think, data is so important. Data is king, but it's how you use that data and how you utilize it. So making sure that we're making the best use of technology. And I think, as Damian says, making sure we're sharing that information and it's not siloed is going to be the way forward.
And Noel?
I think the importance of that the proceeds of human traffickers is going to fund, ISIS, Sinaloa cartel, these organized crime operation, and it's Crimes Inc. as a whole. And so by following the data, it leads us to following the money better and to create better safeguards against interacting with traffickers from a financial standpoint.
And Sherry, I'll have you close this out.
There's no pressure there, is there? Obviously, I agree with everything else the other panelists said, and I would leave with one other thought that we've only touched on just a little bit, and that increasingly as some of this content is going in deep web, password-protected, authenticated spaces, or even worse, into encrypted apps, we need to be pushing on-device mitigation or hard encrypted or some of those risk classifiers that we talked about built into the software so that some of these companies cannot stand behind and say, well, it was encrypted. There's nothing I could do about it. So that really touches on a lot of the issues that we have discussed between data accessibility, the role of corporate partners, where the money comes from. And I think that all of these things are clearly related, and together, like I said, we have a much stronger position fighting counter trafficking the more that we collaborate.
Very much. Thank you. So thank you all to our audience. I think that brings us just inside our time, maybe just outside of it. We appreciate you joining and looking forward to seeing you next year.